Hey, Dr. Jon Finn here. Welcome to the Habit Mechanic podcast. Right now, you can get my new best-selling book, Train Your Brain for the AI Revolution, at tougherminds.co.uk. The digital book, audiobook, and physical book are all available at a special price that you won't find anywhere else.
Hello, Habit Mechanics. I hope that you're well. We are going to talk about sleep, diet, and exercise. I'm joined today, as ever, by my friend and colleague, Andrew Whitelam. Andrew, how are you doing?
Yeah, hi there, John. Very well, thanks. Good to see you again. And yeah, sleep, diet, and exercise is the subject of chapter 19 of the Habit Mechanic book. So we're focusing our attention around that, as you say, initially. And yeah, it's a chapter I know catches so many people's attention. It is like many other chapters and so much more of the content in the Habit Mechanic book, very practical and applicable and really accessible. So I know people will benefit massively just from listening to this podcast, and getting themselves a copy of the book as well will be hugely beneficial. So yeah, I think it's important just to get through this as thoroughly as we can, because it's so beneficial. And of course we're also rooting this conversation in our stress awareness month, because of the interdependency, the interrelation between diet, exercise, and sleep, and optimizing it and reducing stress, which I know you're going to explain to us very shortly. So that's exciting too. So this is very much staying within that framework as well. You start chapter 19 with a story which we'll talk about a bit later on, about a very well-known sporting champion. But you also explain that optimizing your diet, your exercise, and sleep has so many benefits. Things like improving your productivity, your confidence, your leadership even. But then significantly, you also say that it will help you spend less time thinking unhelpful thoughts and help you with your stress management. So, John, give us an outline of why. Why is it so profound, the diet, exercise, and sleep for us as humans?
Yeah, because fundamentally it gets our brain working well. So we can link all three back to improving brain function. And if your brain's working well, your limbic systems will be less agitated, so you'll spend less time dwelling, beating yourself up. You'll have more willful control over your behavior that you can use to build and help and build more super habits, more helpful habits, destroy more destructive habits. So it's the foundation. On the timeline of the chapters in the book, it's right at the base of step 3, where we start to show people how they can actually build new helpful habits. And it's at the base for a reason, because if we don't get these 3 things right, everything else is more difficult. So people often, I want to know, how do I do an extra hour of focused high impact work today? That's what I want to focus on. And if we're not sleeping properly or eating properly or exercising properly, our chances of doing that are severely limited. So we've got to get these things right. They are the basics. But like many things for human beings, we think because we know what they are, we've got it covered and we're all good. And I don't need to waste any time paying attention to my sleep, my diet, or my exercise. The challenge is the conditions of the world we live in have changed very quickly. If we just think of, well, let's just start with my own lifespan. I remember the TV going off at a certain time. I remember there being only, I mean, in the evening, where there was nothing on air anymore. There were only 4 channels, um, and I don't even know how old Channel 4 is, but maybe even 3 channels when I was first born. Then we now live in a world in that space where we can just stream things 24/7, not just TV. We've got social media, we've got the phone. This idea from when I was growing up, you had to physically go downstairs into the kitchen to pick the phone up to phone someone up, and I wouldn't be phoning someone at 2 o'clock in the morning, whereas I know people are now sending messages at that time in the morning. So the world around us is changing, and if we fast forward to just the last few years, where most people before the pandemic would have left the house every day to go somewhere physically to go to work, that's changed now. So many people are not even leaving the house anymore in a day. That's massively negatively impacting exercise levels. There is such a wide range of factory made food available now, food products that have been deliberately designed to make them highly appealing to the limbic regions of our brain, to our human R8 brain. And I think there was some data a few months ago showing that 50% of the food we consume in the UK is known to be bad for us. It's ultra processed food. So wherever we look in terms of our sleep, our diet, our exercise, they're getting more hard to do. I know that my generation sleep at least 1 hour less per night than my grandparents' generation. So, than our grandparents' generation. That's like a 1 night sleep less per week. It's like 1 week's, one working week's sleep less per month. These are big changes, and they are damaging brain function.
Yeah, you say that in chapter 19 as well. And I think it's clear from what you've said, these are foundational things we need to get right, our diet, exercise and sleep. And we're going to talk about what we can do in each of those areas in due course. But recently, I think it's really interesting. I saw a YouTube video from Dr. Chris Van Tulleken, who I think some people in the UK might recognize. He has a twin brother. They're both media commentators, reporters, presenters, all of the above on lifestyle issues, well-being issues, health issues. Chris Van Tulleken is a medical doctor, practicing medical doctor. He's also an associate professor at University College London, and he's published a book called Ultra Processed People. And you just mentioned ultra processed food. Then I think he uses the abbreviation UPF, which is not anything to do with sunscreen. It sounds a bit like it, but it's ultra processed food. And he's in this YouTube video, which I think was recorded at the Royal Institution, the organization in Britain that tries to make science accessible to people and share important insights from science. He was speaking there about ultra processed food, I think to promote his book as well, of course, but warning of the dangers of it. And he talked about it being a cause of cancer, a cause of metabolic disease, and most significantly, Jon, for our podcast, he talked about it being a cause of mental illness. And in the book, you write in chapter 19 of The Habit Mechanic, you talk about this too, and how it can be injurious for us, about diet and sleep and exercise as well. So how does it damage our brains? What does bad food and by extension sleep and exercise do to our brains?
Yeah, I think it's been quite hard to measure. So let's say that you eat a Mars bar, and it's quite hard to then track that in your body and see how it impacts brain function. But we've got a general sense of what's going on. One is some of this ultra processed food is unrecognizable to our body. Our body doesn't know what it is, so it can't even pass the blood-brain barrier. So we think we don't typically think when we're eating about, is this good for our brain or not? We're thinking about, is this going to make me fatter? Is this going to make me slimmer? Is this going to give me the right energy levels? But actually, we should be thinking, how is this going to impact my brain function? And in chapter 19, we go through the different sources of things our brain needs in order to function really well. But some of the things we're putting into our body can't get past the blood-brain barrier, so it can't contribute nutritionally to the brain, which is problematic. Our brain burns a disproportionate amount of energy for its size in our body. I think it burns something like 40% of our carbohydrates. The stat is in chapter 19 somewhere, if I've got that wrong. But it's disproportionately a lot. So that's one thing. What we can see then in the brain when we've got people that are consuming high intakes of ultra processed foods, including junk food, is that it does people's brains do start to get damaged. And this is a study I talk about in chapter 19, where I think it was a group of middle-aged men who were put on a junk food diet for a week, and just within that week, what they noticed in the brain was that their hippocampi started to shrink. They got smaller. This is problematic because the hippocampi are the only sites in the human brain that we understand producing new brain cells. If you've got a dogs have hippocampi in their noses. So hippocampi are essential for learning. And one of the things they do is they release the seeds of new brain cells into the brain. And what is mental health? What is a mental health challenge? Well, fundamentally, it's about not being able to get your attention onto what is helpful for you, not being able to think thoughts that help you to feel good about yourself. So if we're in a rut of thinking lots of unhelpful things and doing lots of unhelpful things, what we actually need is to develop some new wires in our brain so we can tell ourselves a different story about what's going on, and we can develop some different habits and some different routines. But if we don't have the seeds for the new brain cells, that's not going to happen. So we can see that ultra processed food, junk food, is damaging the hippocampus, and it's stopping us from being able to. Yeah, we can know what we need to do to get better, but it's stopping us from being able to practice and habitualize those new ways of thinking and doing. So this is very real, and we've been talking about this for a long time, and in that period of time, the volume of ultra processed food people are consuming has massively increased. So it was a problem when we originally spoke about it. Now it's maybe 10 times worse than it was, and it seems to be getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and I know your analysis of why we are compelled to have and consume these bad foods, and hence the situation is worsening. It is also in the Habit Mechanic book as well, and coincidentally, some of the things Dr. Chris Van Tulliken says as well touches on the much deeper analysis you give. So let's hope that more and more people through different channels are just becoming aware of the dangers of this. So as I say, we'll also in chapter 19 of the Habit Mechanic, you cite a really useful example of a well-known sporting champion who has a way of making changes and changing behavior, or certainly the foundational step to take, which we'll talk about in due course. So keep listening out for that. But let's get into then what we should be doing, what sort of things we should be eating, how to get better sleep, how to improve our exercise levels. In as I say, chapter 19, there's a heading 4 ways to improve your diet for brain function. You list them as: eat the right energy, remember fatty acids, stop buying junk food, and get plenty of antioxidants. Perhaps we can take each one of those, starting with eat the right energy.
Yeah, so our brain needs carbs. That's the main source of energy it uses. Now, some people will have heard about diets saying don't eat carbs, cut carbs out of your diet, etc. That's dangerous because carbohydrates in us are the glucose is the fuel that runs the brain. But the types of you can get different types of carbohydrates. on a continuum. Some are simple, all the way through to complex. So complex are things like brown, bread, pasta, rice, but also can refer to my list here actually, because there's also some left field ones that you don't normally think about as being carbohydrates, but sweet potatoes, lentils, peas, that kind of thing, green vegetables. So the key, or one of the four areas of things we need to get right, is to make sure that we're getting our complex carbs into our diet, so that we've got that steady flow of energy into our brain. People experience when they eat simple carbs. Let's say they might have some pasta for lunch, that they can then feel like their energy levels crash after half an hour or an hour or so. And that's created because those carbs burn very quickly. So we've got to be consuming complex carbohydrates. That's what we mean by eat the right energy.
Yeah, and just worth saying, I think, as you say, as you referred to, John, there was a few years ago a bit of an outpouring of no carb diets. I think it was one called the Atkins diet, which just involved eating large quantities of red meat. And yeah, it's maybe unpalatable, no pun intended, for some people, that they have to eat carbs. But as you say, as you pointed out, these unrefined grains, the complex carbohydrates, again, you can find more details in the Habit Mechanic book, chapter 19. That's what we mean when we say carbohydrates. And yeah, I must admit, I think you told me that many years ago about the need for glucose and for the brain, and it was really, really sobering for me, because you just, well, yeah, you didn't know the information, but you just didn't associate that with the brain, because we're kind of conditioned to expect it to be related to, I don't know, endurance exercise and physical performance, that kind of thing. But carbohydrates in the brain, fantastic bit of insight there. Eating the right energy, as you put it. The next point then, remember fatty acids. Talk to us about that, please, John.
Yeah, and I've just found my stats. So although your brain only makes up around 3% of your overall body weight, it uses about 20% of your oxygen and around 25% of your glucose.
Wow.
So it's consuming a disproportionate amount of energy and oxygen. So fatty acids, yeah. So again, there has been a diet movement, maybe less so now, but used to be, and you'll still see food saying low in fat. Fat is essential for us. So our brain, again, we don't think of these things, but our brain isn't made of fairy dust, and it isn't made of Mars bars or cake. It's made of fatty acids. So our brain is changing all the time. Some parts of it are dying, being pruned away, and other parts are growing. So we need building blocks, we need building materials. And the core building materials for the brain are fatty acids. There are two core types of fatty acids. One is omega-6, which you get from things like eggs. The other is omega 3. And typically in our Western diets, we lack the omega-3 fatty acids. We don't have enough of them. So we've got to be mindful to get those into the system. And people are familiar with omega-3 fatty acids in relation to they're in oily fish. They're in cold water fish like salmon, tuna, kiwi fruits, spinach, walnuts, etc. So I'm certainly very mindful that, well, my breakfast is a combination. Well, it's a combination of another one of these as well, but at least 3 days a week I have salmon in a trying to think of how it would be described. Oh yeah, a whole wheat pitta. So I get the complex carbs and the omega-3 fatty acids, and I also squeeze some lemon juice on there, which brings in another one of the areas we're going to talk about. So again, it's one thing knowing this stuff, it's another thing actually getting it into your diet and habitualizing that.
Yeah, and again, I keep saying it, but we're going to come on to that. But I just do think it's so fascinating to drill down into the right things to do. So point 3 then, stop buying junk food. A bit of an obvious one, and you've touched on it. Perhaps we can just move on from that. Studies we've referred to, and in the book you refer to a BBC broadcaster who did a bit of a documentary on himself about the consumption of junk food and the actual damage it did to his brain. So as I say, we have spoken about that just now on the podcast, and so we can leave that perhaps. Unless there's anything you want to add, but let's move on to the final point of the 4. No, sorry, John. Yeah,
there is something I'll add. So we are constantly triggered to buy junk food. I talk about, I think we've discussed it in one of these podcasts, the McDonald's app. I think we discussed it in the last chapter 18 podcast we did about that. When you go to the supermarket, you'll see the ends of the aisles stacked with offers, and often they're junk food. Supermarkets know what we eat, and they know what they make the biggest margins on, and it's often the junk food. And I had when you go to the same supermarket every week, you don't necessarily notice so much the things that change, because the changes are quite subtle. And over the last few, well, not the last few years, but a lot before the pandemic, I worked in America quite a lot. And I was working for one client in Denver, and there was a big supermarket called Whole Foods, which is a bit like Waitrose in the UK. It's actually owned by Amazon. And I went into the supermarket and I noticed that so I'd been there a few times before. So this was maybe the 3rd or 4th time I'd been my trip there. So this time I went and I noticed by the tills, the cash points, they had all cakes, muffins, and cupcakes and brownies. I was just got my attention thinking that's new. And I subsequently read, I think the day afterwards in the New York Times or something, that Whole Foods had doubled the amount of money they were making on those products just by simply putting them via the tills. So we are being manipulated all the time to buy this stuff. When you go to the cafe, I can think Cafe Nero I go to, Brett, what do you see in the counter? It's the cakes, it's the muffins. They're there deliberately because they're trying to catch you when your willpower's a little bit low, and you just give in and say, "Oh yeah, I'll have one of those, thanks." So we just got to be really conscious of that. And if you're in the habit of having your double chocolate chip muffin, then you can create a D.E.S swap to help you to work on that habit and replace it with something else. So I have a sweet tooth and I do like chocolate. So now I just I eat a lot of 90% dark chocolate, and I'll just literally have a square of that Lindt, do a nice one, and one square of that is 50 calories, and there's a tiny bit of sugar in it, and I find that as satisfying as I would having a bigger chocolate bar or something. So it's often about it's easier to replace something than to stop something. So you've got to think of that. How do I replace this? And then eventually, once you've sort of weaned yourself off the sugar, it's easier to stop and do something else. But yeah, so that's a little stop buying junk food story, an exclusive for the Habit Mechanic podcast.
Yeah, great stuff. And Lindt, if you're listening, you know where to send the 90% chocolate. But no, it is interesting, John, that for you to share your personal experience. Yeah. So well, thank you for that. Let's go then on to the final fourth point about antioxidants and their ability to tackle the problem of free radicals.
Yeah, so we're in the bigger theme of stress this month, Stress Awareness Month. I think it's quite helpful to think about stress as a physical impact on your brain, like you get a whack on the head or something. It's doing that, it's working the brain harder, the brain's whirling round. That whirling round and overuse causes inflammation, like when you get a physical injury. The chemicals that get released in the stress response, cortisol, etc., they stack up. They again cause inflammation and damage. That goes back to what we were speaking about with the hippocampi becoming shrunk and damaged. So we need to put into our body nutrition that we know is good at countering the damage that we get in our bodies, and we get these free radicals being produced essentially, and we know they can damage brain function. So it's important that we get the antioxidants into our body, which you can get from things like oranges, citrus fruits. I talked about squeezing a lemon onto my salmon in the morning, but also red peppers, almonds, spinach, sweet potatoes, broccoli. Also, the editor must have taken this out of my book because maybe they didn't know what it was. But no, it's just nice it's not in the book, which is lipoic acids. The lipoic acids are what you get from offally meat. So they're a good source of antioxidants. Offally meat coming back into fashion. But yeah, so get plenty of antioxidants.
Yeah, and I think spinach and sweet potatoes appear in the complex carbs heading as well. So sounds like they're two superfoods for your brain. If we just judge by what we've just had a run through. So yeah, fantastic. That's really great. And it's just great to hear what we can eat to improve our brain function, and of course support us in building helpful new habits, or super habits as you would call them. And yeah, if you want to read more, you can in chapter 19, of course, of The Habit Mechanic. Let's move on to exercise then, John. Obviously, diet, exercise, and sleep. You talked about a D.E.S swap, diet, exercise, and sleep, or D.E.S as you refer to it in The Habit Mechanic. Why is exercise important for our brain function and our ability to build super habits and combat stress?
Yeah, fundamentally because we're designed to move around. We're designed to walk about 12 miles a day. We are hunter-gatherers. So when we move, it activates our brain in a helpful, positive way. So we're designed to move around and solve problems, or learning, in other words. So when we move around, we get a protein in our brain release called BDNF. So it helps our brain to function well. Typically, we overeat now. We consume too many calories. So exercising is important as well to burn off those calories, to burn off the excess of energy that otherwise resides in our body and causes health issues. Exercise also is helpful for getting a good night's sleep. So if we don't exercise, sleep will be harder. But again, we've seen a huge increase in sedentary behavior, and not just since the pandemic, actually a long time before the pandemic. You know, one of our colleagues, Professor Jim McKenna, this is one of his areas of expertise, helping organizations, government to get people more active using behavioral science. But the part of the fallout from the pandemic, I think, is people are just moving around less because they are they don't need to. They don't need to leave the house. And I hear some people making a virtue of that because they don't understand actually how important physical activity is. So, yeah, exercise first and foremost. Think about walking. Your body is designed to walk about 12 miles a day. It doesn't mean you need to walk 12 miles a day. It just means recognize what you're actually designed to do. I actually try to walk about 10 miles, run and walk about 10 miles a day in the working week. So I'm aiming for a 60-mile average per week. Last week I got 64 miles, so I had a good week. I'm running probably between 15 to 20 miles a week, and the rest is walking. So I'm very deliberately walking, get myself out, get out in the morning for a run, get out mid-morning for another walk, try to get out after lunch for another walk, and then I do a longer walk in the evening. So, and I notice the huge difference when I don't do that. I don't sleep as well. I feel more stressed. I don't think as clearly. I get loads of great insights about things I'm working on whilst I'm walking and running. So it's so key, but we're doing less of it. And it's not just about walking. We've got to make sure that we're working our muscles out as well. Again, not necessarily going to the gym, but mowing the lawn, doing some gardening, just doing some sit-ups and some press-ups and building the routine around that. That's something I've done over the years as well. So I try to do, and I've hurt my shoulder the last few weeks, so I haven't been doing this, but I try, I do about, as a minimal 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups per day. And when I'm on it, I'm aiming to do 1,000 repetitions per week. So just setting yourself these little challenges, these little goals. Just start with one press up, one sit up. It'll be so key. So yeah, it's real. We need to do it, and it's ultimately about habits.
Yeah, again, this please stay with us. It's coming. We're going to talk about how you can start to change your behavior in terms of your diet and exercise and sleep. And of course, you can see all of this in the Habit Mechanic book, chapter 19 and beyond. But in chapter 19, it's something you do so fascinatingly. It's just a detail almost, just a microcosm of things. But I just like to do it. I'm going to read them out so you don't have to, John, because I know you do most of the talking on these sessions. But you talk about how different types of activity and exercise help the brain in different ways. And I think it's helpful for people to know that, because it gives them a gateway to start changing the behavior. And of course, as you say, knowledge and skills is a component of behavior change. So in the Habit Mechanic book, you say lifting weights and strength training is connected to complex thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. Aerobic exercise is thought to boost the memory. HIIT training, or high intensity interval training, as people call it, helps us regulate cravings and addictions and appetite, which we've just been discussing. Yoga, which is something a lot of people do, connected to strengthening brain circuits and emotional regulation. And exercising outdoors in the daytime, which of course you've just talked about, and cited your personal example, which has been very helpful. Improve our mood, because light helps brain chemistry. So you list those points there, which are really, really useful. And I think it's worth pointing out, perhaps you could just do that for us. All that is supported by scientific insight and research.
Yeah, so since we're able to actually look at brains in real time, it's easier to measure the impact of these types of things. But we just know fundamentally that moving around is good for us. It is good for us. That's another thing, actually, I would say definitely I see. So high intensity interval training helps regulate cravings, addictions, appetite. I definitely notice if I go for a run, I'm not as hungry. I don't feel like, which sounds counterintuitive, right? But I don't need to eat as much because we are fundamentally designed to work in that way. Our world's changed a lot. We are designed to be moving around. We've only been societally farming for about 12,000 years, which is a long period of time, right? But not in the span of how long we've been around as a species. We've been around for over 300,000 years. That's just a little slice of that. So we're designed to be moving around. And if you went to London, for example, 100 years ago, people on average were walking about 10 miles a day. And not everybody, because you had to walk to get around. Now, we don't have to. And because of technology, we don't even have to leave the house. We can just get everything delivered to us. So yeah, this is just so essential, but you don't need to know the science necessarily. You just need to put it into practice, and it'll make you feel better. It'll help you to feel better and get that brain working well.
Thanks for listening to the Habit Mechanic podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe and tell someone else about one of the ideas or insights that you found most interesting.